Hello to everyone listening, and this is going to be an interesting video slash audio log about. It's going to be more of a video game based one, and I had an interesting question that I brought up to myself the other day, and I was talking about specific years in gaming and which ones are the best, which ones weren't. So I came up with the conclusion that I personally believe that 1999 is single-handedly the greatest year for video games and the greatest year for video games of all time. And what I'm going to do is start this video by naming off just a few ones based solely upon their Metacritic scores. Now, this doesn't really mean anything. This is just what is on the website, and I'm just going to read it down so it gives you a good view about what we're going to be talking about today. So apparently number one for 1999 is Soul Calibur, followed by Gran Turismo 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Homeworld, System Shock 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Age of Empires, Unreal Tournament, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, the original Medal of Honor for the PlayStation, and scrolling down further we have Planescape Torment, Legacy of Kain, Rayman 2, Donkey Kong 64, and so on and so forth, even the first Silent Hill, EverQuest. Let's see, so Jet Force Gemini was a good one. Super Smash Brothers, Mario Party, Harvest Moon 64, Pokemon Snap. All the way down, let's go with some more of these. And, of course, you'll have the token Quake 3 Arena. Everybody loves Quake 3 Arena. You have all these amazing games that came out in 1999. Some of these still hold up to this day, especially Unreal Tournament and Quake 3, even System Shock 2 especially. So you have a lot of these video games that were released in this one year, and granted you have games like Unreal Tournament and Quake 3 which were released days apart from each other. Unreal Tournament was released on November 30th. Quake 3 Arena was released on December 2nd of 1999. So it was one of those epic years for gaming that I don't honestly think any other year, possibly besides 2004, that could top that. Since we're going on that, I will actually look up 2004 just so we can get some notable ones for 2004. Of course, are going to be Half-Life 2, Doom 3, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. So you have a lot of them such like that. And we'll get, of course, into the Metacritic here just to see. So it's listed in a condensed list for you. So we have Halo 2, Burnout 3, Splinter Cell, Unreal Tournament 2004. There again. Rome Total War, Ratchet & Clank, Metal Gear Solid 3, The Sims 2, Chronicle of Riddick. Let's see, Far Cry, the original. So, and Counter-Strike Source. So you have a lot of these amazing video games that came out 1999, 2004. I'd honestly have to say that I believe 1999 is single-handedly the greatest one, with 2004 being a very, very close second. So now let's get into what I personally believe why 1999 is the greatest. So we'll go with single-player games at the start. We'll start with System Shock 2. So System Shock 2 is one of those games where I never actually played it until about 2013. I've heard of it, heard about it, saw my brother and a couple other people mention it, play it, and it just didn't really interest me at the time. So some of you may or may not know that System Shock 2 was developed using the same game engine as the Thief games, the original Thief games, and were actually made by some of the same people. Warren Spector, the guy who created System Shock 2, is actually back on board to create the sequel, System Shock 3. It's now 2017, and this game's not supposed to come out until, I believe, 2018 or 2019. So it's going to be almost 20 years since he worked on System Shock 2 that he's been working on System Shock 3, so that you'll have an interesting 20-year gap between a game, its sequels, and its whatever. System Shock 2 is one of those single-player games that people still play to this day because it is just an interesting story, very involved, very in-depth, and with a lot of twists that not many people saw coming at the time. Very great voice acting, really good performances overall. And then you get into multiplayer games. We'll go with Unreal Tournament and Quake 3. The two games that I believe I have probably sunk the most hours into a multiplayer game since I was born. So you have Unreal Tournament, which was pretty much the stereotypical arcade, but all of the game modes had like a specific purpose. You had like domination, capture the flag, and even an assault game mode, which was like one of the first multiplayer games to include something like that, where you actually had specific objectives within a map that you had to do to progress. And then you had Quake 3 Arena, which was all about arena combat, in your face, explosions, blood and guts, everything, everywhere. And yeah, they did have like capture the flag and various other things like that, but it was all deathmatch. It was all who could come out on top. It was all skill. It was all twitch. Everything was balanced enough to where each weapon was completely unique and that you had to actually go out of your way to figure out the quirks, because there were no one player had an advantage of the other within the game itself. Everything was equal. Didn't matter what your character looked like. They all moved the same. So it was an aspect, one of those completely well-rounded packages that it was all based on player skill. So now you get into other, like some of the console games. We'll get into the single-player games, like, Soul Calibur's kind of both, but Soul Calibur, like a fighting game, really, really good, which is what brought Soul Calibur into, a weapon-based fighting game into the home console market, because it was entirely based on the arcades at that point. And then Gran Turismo 2, honestly, one of the greatest racing sims, or sims, quote-unquote, that you'd be able to find. Street Fighter. Of course, you had Street Fighter 2, all that stuff, but the Street Fighter 3 was what kind of brought it into the home console mainstream, I guess you would say. Homeworld, I never played Homeworld, so I wouldn't know about that. And of course, you have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which we all know, one of the greatest skating games of all time up until the most recent ones kind of created. Age of Empires 2. And Age of Empires 2 was loved and played so much, even to this day, that a couple years ago they completely redid almost the entire game in modern resolutions and everything, with support, the Steam Workshop and everything like that. So you have an entire community that was already strong, and now even stronger, because the developers decided to take a look at the game and say, hey, people are still playing this 15, 16 years later, why not make it better for them? And of course, you have Medal of Honor. Everybody knows where Medal of Honor went. One of the greatest PC games of all time. Some of the originals, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which came out a few years after this. And of course, you have pretty much all the Nintendo games. So you have Donkey Kong 64, Mario Party, Resident Evil 2, arguably one of the greatest Resident Evil games ever. Final Fantasy 8. Which was okay. It wasn't as good as Final Fantasy VII, but it was still pretty a good one. Silent Hill, one of the greatest atmospheric horror games ever created, the first one especially, because it made you feel as if you were almost entirely powerless within the game itself. EverQuest, one of the greatest MMOs of all time. I don't know if people are still playing it. I'm assuming they would, because they came out with a sequel. Jet Force Gemini, of course. Super Smash Brothers. Where would we be in this world without Super Smash Brothers? Whoever's idea it was at Nintendo to create arena fighting game, a battle royale game, out of every single Nintendo character that's ever been created is a genius, and I hope he was promoted, and I hope he lived to be a billionaire. Especially, and then you have like Mario Party. Many of friendships ruined at Mario Party and all its subsequent sequels. Mario Kart has nothing on Mario Party. And then you have other games, which I'm going to look at some of these that are towards the lower ones. And I'm scoring this down based on their Metacritic score, so there could be more that there. Probably a lot of them that I'm missing a lot here, so let me go back up. And then, of course, you got the Might and Magic games, which came out on PC at the very beginning of the year 1999, so you would have pretty much the entire year to play the brand new Might and Magic games, which is really, really nice. Super Smash Brothers actually came out really early that year. Same with Silent Hill, that was in January. Final Fantasy came out really early as well. Heroes of Might and Magic also came out that year. Here's Might and Magic 3. Let's see some of these other ones. Team Fortress Classic. I almost completely forgot about that one, because Team Fortress, as some of you may know, it was a mod for the very first Quake, and what had happened is they tried to port it over to the Quake 2 engine, and it wasn't really that good of a port. So Valve decided that they looked at all of these, and when Valve as a company was starting to become up and big, they were looking for content. They had already created Half-Life, so they looked at this team that had created the Team Fortress mod and hired all of them to create Team Fortress Classic. And as we know, Team Fortress has become one of the greatest franchises that Valve has ever created, or helped create, rather. Let's see, Midtown Madness, really interesting racing game, fully arcade, a lot of good fun with that. Let's see, Command & Conquer. The original Command & Conquer came out in 1999. We all know where they went. Very, very, very amazing RTS series by Command & Conquer. Unfortunately, I'm not going to blame EA for this. I should, but I don't think it's really warranted how Command & Conquer. Rainbow Six Rogue Spear came out that year. Excellent game. Not really a big fan of the Rainbow Six games in the past. It was just too extreme, too convoluted for me. Not really something that I got interested in. I do have like some of the older games, and I do play them from time to time, but sometimes I find it's just too complicated, too convoluted for at least my level of intelligence. The original Sonic Adventure came out in the Dreamcast. That was an interesting game because growing up I didn't have a Dreamcast, so whenever my neighbors across the street they got one, so they let us play. We played Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, Crazy Taxi. We played all those games, and they were amazing. But luckily and happily, my father found that that the Dreamcast was basically going down the tube because the original PlayStation was surpassing it tenfold. So it was just one of those games, or one of those systems where we never really got to experience it for what it was worth, and I believe the Dreamcast could have been so much greater than what it was. Spyro 2, some of the expansions for Half-Life came out. Half-Life Opposing Force, which is an interesting perspective because you played as the, quote, opposite side, close quote. You're basically playing as the enemies in Opposing Force, and your mission was to intercept Gordon Freeman from the first Half-Life game, and you got to see everything evolve around you in a different perspective. Instead of you being the lone person in Half-Life, you actually had like squads of people that you could interact with, progress the story and whatnot. Let's see, SWAT 3, arguably one of the best SWAT games that they ever made. Of course, SWAT 4 being better, but I'm not sure. I've heard people say SWAT 3 is better than 4, or 4 better than, vice versa. But and of course, Donkey Kong 64, one of the greatest N64 games of all time. Rare, one of the greatest developers that has ever graced this planet. We already talked about Unreal Tournament and Quake 3. That was pretty much every single game that was ever released, or rather a notable release, 1999. So, and also 1999, the notable systems that were out in 1999, so you have the Dreamcast, the Game Boy Color, Nintendo 64, and the PlayStation, and of course Windows. So that was kind of the era where PlayStation and Nintendo started to take back over with what Sega had tried to do. So I think this might be a relatively shorter one. There's not really much more I can go on. Pretty much this whole thing was just about to talk about how many noticeable video games that came out in the year 1999, and why I still to this day believe that 1999 will go down as one of the greatest years for gaming of all time. And I think in the next one I will go over 2004, just to kind of show you how they progressed in just 5 years, in just 5 lonely years, how the video game industry progressed so much that I believe the biggest leap was from 1999 to 2004, and that was the sharpest leap that I think the video game industry will ever have. And I think the industry itself is starting to stagnate because at this point you're pretty much out of ideas. You can only recycle and reuse what you've done before. But that's a topic for another video. So I think I might gonna end it here, and you have yourselves a wonderful evening.